Imagine you're standing in the middle of a totally serene, completely untouched forest. And then, out of nowhere, the sky just explodes. The date is June 30th, 1908. Deep in the frozen wilderness of Siberia, the morning is starting out like literally any other. But right at 7:17 a.m., witnesses look up and see the impossible. This massive glowing object just streaking across the sky, moving insanely fast, and it's actually brighter than the sun itself. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking an event so incredibly powerful and so completely baffling that well over a century later, experts are still trying to piece the whole thing together. We're looking at the great cosmic mystery of Tunguska.
Eyewitness accounts from that morning, they paint a picture of absolute sheer terror. One local actually reported that the heat felt like his clothes were catching fire. People saw this massive fireball just tearing across the horizon. Others were literally thrown to the ground over 40 miles away. And windows? They shattered hundreds of miles from the blast. You know, the pure terror of witnessing a seemingly apocalyptic event in such a remote, quiet part of the world, it's just almost impossible to imagine. And then, suddenly, boom, a gigantic explosion absolutely ripped through the atmosphere. Now, this wasn't some slow buildup, right? It was an instant, violently sudden detonation that unleashed absolute destruction on the Siberian wilderness down below. The shockwave smashed through the trees like a giant invisible wall. People hundreds of miles away heard this deafening sound, and honestly, a lot of them genuinely thought the world was ending. So to really understand what happened here, we need to treat the aftermath like a massive cosmic crime scene.
Section 1. The crime scene. 800 square miles of destruction.
Okay, let's dive into this, because the sheer scale of this crime scene is just mind-boggling. 80 million. I really want you to let that massive number sink in for a second. Over 80 million trees were knocked completely flat in mere seconds. We're not talking hundreds or even thousands, but tens of millions of ancient Siberian trees just snapped like toothpicks across the entire landscape.
Now, when investigators finally mapped out the blast radius, they stumbled onto a super bizarre physical anomaly. See, those millions of trees we just talked about, they were laid out in this massive circular pattern, radiating outward from the center. But right at the actual epicenter, the trees were still standing upright. Seriously, they were completely burned, totally stripped of every single branch, but they hadn't fallen over. And this specific, strange little pattern told scientists something absolutely crucial. Whatever blew up didn't actually hit the ground. It detonated up in the sky. And that brings us to the missing evidence, which, honestly, is the massive plot twist of our explainer today. There was no crater. None. Zero. Think about that for a second. You've got 80 million flattened trees, an explosion that literally lit up the sky, but a total, absolute absence of an impact site. That one single detail took Tunguska from a typical meteor strike and turned it into one of history's absolute greatest unsolved mysteries. Now, you might be wondering, how on earth do you just lose track of an explosion this massive? Well, let's look at this timeline, because it really builds the mystery. Back in 1908, Siberia was incredibly remote. Harsh weather, basically zero roads. And then, right after, Russia was plunged into political chaos, revolution, and eventually World War I. So because of all that madness, the very first major scientific expedition, led by Russian scientist Leonid Kulik, didn't even happen until the 1920s. Kulik treks into this frozen wilderness, fully expecting to find a massive meteor crater, but instead, he just finds miles and miles of flattened forest and zero answers. So, if there's no crater, what kind of force are we actually dealing with here?
Section 2. The power of Tunguska.
So we're going to break down the absolutely terrifying energy unleashed that morning. Just to put this into perspective, let's compare it to the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima, which released about 15 kilotons of energy. Scientists estimate the Tunguska explosion released somewhere between 10 to 15 megatons of TNT. Guys, that means Tunguska was up to 1,000 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. It's just staggering. An explosion stronger than a nuclear weapon just happened naturally over Earth in 1908. If this had detonated over a major city instead of remote Siberia, millions of people could have vanished in an instant.
And the thing is, this wasn't just some local fluke. This was a world-shaking event, literally. The shockwave was so massive, it circled the Earth multiple times. Seismic stations way beyond Russia's borders recorded violent vibrations, and atmospheric pressure changes were picked up all around the globe. Oh, and get this, the skies across Europe actually glowed at night for days after the blast. The entire planet felt the impact of the Tunguska event. Section 3. What really happened?
the prime suspects.
So what exactly possessed the power to shake the entire planet but leave absolutely zero impact crater behind? Let's put on our detective hats for a minute. The entire mystery hinges on one absolutely crucial scientific concept, the airburst. So the crucial point is, this is the linchpin that finally explains the missing crater. An airburst is basically a violent explosion that happens high in the atmosphere when a space object detonates under extreme heat and pressure way before it ever reaches the surface. As this object is just screaming through our atmosphere at tens of thousands of miles per hour, the air in front of it compresses incredibly fast, generating unimaginable heat. Eventually, the space rock just can't handle the intense pressure, and boom, it detonates in the sky like a giant bomb.
And that leads us to our two leading scientific suspects for this particular airburst, an asteroid versus a comet. So, on one hand, we've got the asteroid theory, a dense, rocky object that just blew up under all that extreme atmospheric pressure. But on the other hand, we have the comet theory, which suggests the object was made mostly of ice and dust. Now, the comet theory is particularly fascinating, right? Because it perfectly explains the total lack of physical evidence on the ground. If it was a massive ball of ice, it would have completely vaporized in the airburst, leaving basically zero debris for us to find. Plus, it neatly explains those glowing night skies over Europe, since the icy comet dust would have scattered high into the atmosphere, reflecting sunlight way after dark.
But of course, when you have an event this strange, leaving so little physical evidence behind, well, it naturally breeds some pretty wild creative theories. So let's quickly acknowledge the fringe suspects. People have suggested everything from alien spacecraft crashes to extraterrestrials intentionally blowing up their own ships to save humanity, to antimatter collisions, miniature black holes, and yep, even the eccentric inventor Nikola Tesla. There's actually a wildly popular myth that claims Tesla accidentally triggered the blast during his wireless energy experiments in New York. Now look, there's absolutely zero solid scientific evidence for these pop culture myths, but honestly, it's kind of hard not to enjoy the sheer mystery that keeps these crazy ideas floating around.
Section 4. A cosmic warning. The threat remains.
All right, let's ground ourselves back in reality for a second because the true scientific explanations are definitely scary enough all on their own. And this isn't just ancient history either. To prove this is still a very modern concern, we only have to look back to the year 2013 when a meteor exploded over Chelyabinsk, Russia. It was another atmospheric airburst. Now, while this object was much, much smaller than whatever caused Tunguska, the shockwave from it still managed to shatter thousands of windows and injured over 1,000 people. Our Earth is not isolated in a bubble. We are being bombarded by space debris every single day.
So the most terrifying takeaway from our explainer today is simply this. You don't actually need a direct impact to cause catastrophic destruction. An explosion up in the atmosphere alone can completely devastate entire regions. And this is exactly why this matters to you and me today. It's exactly why organizations like NASA are out there actively monitoring the skies, constantly tracking near-Earth asteroids, trying to find these dangerous objects long before they ever get close to our planet. Tunguska proved without a doubt that the sky above us holds some pretty unpredictable power.
So here we are, more than 100 years later, and the great cosmic mystery of Tunguska still endures. No crater, no definitive, universally agreed-upon answer. Just millions of fallen trees and a really stark reminder that our universe is far more dangerous and way more mysterious than we usually realize. Was it a rocky asteroid, a totally vaporized comet, or maybe something humanity just hasn't fully grasped yet? I want to leave you with this question to ponder. What do you think caused the Tunguska explosion? Look at the evidence, weigh the theories, and let your curiosity guide you. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your eyes on the stars, and as always, keep learning.